Welcome to the Emerson Center for the Arts and Culture. I'm Susan Denson-Guy, the Emerson's Executive Director. Thank you for joining us this evening to learn more about Susie Mathre and her current exhibit in the Jessie Wilber Gallery, The Botany of Mathre, an exploration of numbers and nature. Please make sure that your cameras and microphones are turned off for the duration of the presentation. Before we go any further this evening, we'd like to pause. We'd like to pause to acknowledge that the Emerson Center for the Arts and Culture occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Absaliga Crow, the Salish Kootenai, the Flathead, and the Cheyenne. We honor all of the indigenous caretakers of these lands, waters, and the elders who lived here before, the indigenous of today, and the generations to come. At this time, we'd like to invite each of you to follow the link that we provided in the chat and to acknowledge the lands that you're joining us from this evening. This is our third time hosting a virtual event of this size. We're going to ask for a little grace and latitude as we navigate this virtual forum. If you're having technical issues this evening, please keep in mind that we'll post the full recording of this presentation, including the question and answers, on our YouTube channel early next week. Throughout the talk, we're going to invite you to use the chat box to submit any questions that you may have for Susie regarding her artwork. And if time allows, at the end of Susie's presentation, we'll answer a few questions. If we run short on time, Susie will still answer all of your questions. We'll just share her responses via our social media. Before Susie's presentation this evening, I'd like for us to take a quick virtual tour of the exhibit. Tamara Knappenberger, our events and membership manager, will share that with us. And after this quick tour, we'll get to learn more about Susie and her art. Enjoy. Susie, the virtual tour does not do your work justice. Spectacular.
Thank you.
Every time I look at Susie's work, I see something different. Susie's work is the epitome of the meticulous perfection. She grew up here in Bozeman, and this exhibit is an outstanding blend of her love for botany that she shares with her parents, expert studies in math theory, which she claimed to know nothing about before she created these works. Not sure I buy that. And her own background in fine arts. Susie and her studio partner were among the first tenants to call the Emerson home back in the early 90s. And almost a decade ago, when I joined the Emerson, it's hard to believe that it's been that long, I would often see Susie enter the building with your bike helmet still in place and a bag full of plant parts that you'd collected from some adventure around the valley. I remember you always taking time to check out the exhibits that were hung in the lobby. And one time you walked in and you had a bag of dead plant parts. And I think I asked you, in my words, I probably said, "What the hell are you going to do with that?" And you said, "I don't know yet." Well, sure enough, a few, maybe 6 months later or something, we hosted a tenant show for the Emerson in the lobby. And sure enough, a bag of dead plant parts had been resurrected, and you had meticulously sliced off thorns from wild roses and added them to one of the pieces that are actually in the show. It's really our honor, Susie, to have your work here. I know it's been a long time since you've had a solo show, so thank you. Thank you for giving us the privilege of showing your work. And I'd like to hand it over to you to tell a little bit about yourself and walk us through a few of the pieces.
Okay, so you mentioned a few things about me, but I'm just going to kind of fill that out a little bit more. So I did grow up here in Bozeman. I went to Irving School, not the Emerson. My family had a large garden every summer, so I helped out with the planting and the harvesting. And both my parents have degrees in botany, so I've been surrounded by plants for a long time. I've also had an interest in mechanical things, and I loved building these little miniature furniture kits for my dollhouse as a child. And I've always loved art. I used to check out several books from the library every week, and I really loved looking through those. I didn't end up taking art in high school because I thought I was maybe going to go into engineering. So I took quite a bit of math at that point. Then I left for college. I went to University of Oregon in Eugene, and when I got there, I decided to follow my heart and take art. So I took a lot of different studio classes. I did a lot of printmaking, photography. That's where I learned how to letterpress. But what I really wanted to do there was learn paper making, which they didn't have. So when I had to choose a focus for my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, I did it in fibers. And I created really large wall pieces that were 6 by 6 feet, wool felt, that dealt with turbulence patterns. So after college, I'd had enough of the rainy weather, and I came back to Bozeman. I rented a studio here. I was in here for, I think, 20 years. And that's when I acquired my Vandercook letterpress. I got it from Northern Idaho. And my studio partner and I set up a dark room here. And I did a little bit of art showing, but at some point I realized I needed a regular job. And so I started volunteering at the Community Food Co-op. And I eventually got hired, and I did a lot of graphic design for them. I did their logos. I did all the handmade signs that are there. I made limited edition letterpress posters, and I cashiered, and I was there for over 25 years. Wow. So you'll notice that a lot of this work incorporates steel and encaustic wax, which is not something I learned at college. So about 10 years ago or so, I took a short course in metalsmithing at the Bear Canyon School of Art. And then I also took a weekend workshop in encaustics. And I really enjoy learning about those things. And so I wanted to improve my skills. And so I began this body work in 2012 with the idea that I would eventually make enough pieces to have a solo show. So here it is.
I'm glad that we were able to give you a little nudge to do that. I'm going to step off of the screen, Susie, and let you start your screen share.
Right.
Remember, folks, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and we will give Susie a chance to answer those at the end of her talk.
Okay, so this is called the Botany of Mathre, and it's kind of a play on my name. And I just want to give a credit to Rachel Leith, who did all the photography for me. So the first piece I want to talk about is the Rocky Mountain Juniper. And I really like this view. It's of the short end, and it's not a viewpoint that I noticed until my photographer took this shot. So I'm thankful for that. Here's a top view, and the impetus for this piece was a broken branch that I found while out on a hike, and I was curious about the darker wood in the middle. It's called the heartwood. And I was curious because one end looks different from the other, and I wondered what transpired in between. So I wondered what story would unfold down the length of this branch, and so I decided to slice it up and see what the transition looked like. And in order to see both sides of the discs easily, I wanted them to be able to spin. So these discs are attached with tiny stainless steel bolts to the arched steel pieces, and they're positioned to resemble kind of an open book in an arch. And then all of these pieces are bolted on to a piece of wood it's called reglet, and that's something that you use as spacing material in letterpress printing. So because these discs are pretty small, they're probably about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, I designed and constructed a magnifying glass that slides over them for closer observation. And I really like the style of Art Deco, so you probably see a lot of arch shapes in other pieces. Here's a close-up of the magnifying glass. Here's another close-up of that. Here's a close-up of the discs. And if you want to have a puzzle, you can try and figure out how they originally were oriented by spinning them. I kind of like this view because it looks like a bridge. Here's a side view. And here's a close-up of the title plate that I made out of brass, and it has a letterpressed title in there. And on all of the pieces that I have brass title plates, they're all different, and they all kind of reflect some aspect of the piece. So this one had arches, so hence the arched shape. Okay, this is the Western Salsafee piece, and this piece focuses on the patterns that plants create as they grow. And I started noticing the spiral patterns in the Salsafee seed heads in the winter because when I was out skiing, they're one of the few things that still stick up above the snow. This got me interested in researching what I was seeing. And so I did some internet research and bought an old textbook and started learning about what I was finding. Susan, I'm having trouble advancing the slide.
Just use the mouse and click once and see if that works for you.
Okay, there we go. All right. So this is the Salsafee in the flower form, and then the lower right is how the seed head looks. It's also called goat's beard, and this is not a native plant. It's not invasive yet, but it's kind of a weed. So the patterns and arrangement of leaves and petals that plants exhibit is called phyllotaxis. And there's 4 different types of phyllotaxis, but most plants have what's called spiral phyllotaxis. And this is connected to the Fibonacci sequence. So the Fibonacci sequence is one of the most famous formulas in mathematics, and it's connected to the golden ratio, the golden spiral, and found in various other forms in nature. And so the sequence is made by adding the sum of the previous 2 numbers starting with 0 and 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5. And then here's a continuation of this series, and this series continues forever. So if you look at the bottom of this pine cone, you can kind of see that there's some spiral shapes going on. And so here we have 8 spirals that are going counterclockwise, but then there's another spiral pattern that goes the other way. And there's 13 spirals here. So this pair of numbers is known as the Parastichi number, and they're always in pairs. And you can see that the 8 and 13 are consecutive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. And so plants can have any number of pairs. So it could be a 2, 3, it could be a 34, 55. So here are a few more specimens that you can look at to see the numbers. So the sempervivum on the left has a Parastichi number of 3 and 5. So there's the 3 different spirals going counterclockwise and the 5 going counterclockwise. And on the right, I have Echeveria and Parastichi number of 2, 3. So there's 2 going that way and 3 going the other way. All right, so this is a top view of the spiral pattern with the Salsabee heads in domes that are representing where the first 8 buds would move to after originating in the center. So the first bud forms in the middle and it moves outward. And then it makes room for the next bud, which turns out to be 137.5 degrees from the first one. And then the third one is also 137.5 degrees from the next one. And as each bud forms, they all form 137.5 degrees from the previous one. So there's the 4th, there's the 5th, 6th is up there, 7th, and then there's the 8th. And now I'm going to show all the next buds filling in this animation. And you can start to see the spiral pattern through that. So here we have the 5 that go counterclockwise and the 8 that go clockwise. In this shot, there's a close-up of the order of the buds that will eventually appear. So the older buds have already moved away from the center, and so the larger numbers that are embedded deeper in the beeswax will form later in time. Here's a close-up of all the Salsabee heads, and you can kind of see the spirals, but because they're so small, I scanned in each of them and then I enlarged them, the image, and then I use that to cut out the steel pieces that surround the stalks. So these Salsafee heads, they're pretty fragile. These are all dipped in beeswax. And by the way, all the metal has been covered in wax so that it doesn't rust. And so I got these domes and I needed to figure out a way to attach them to the piece. And so I wanted them to be able to open. So there's a hinge on one side, and then the clasp here is designed sort of similar to my first Nordic ski bindings. And this is a view of the inside of the domes. And I printed and attached the taxonomic ranks. So domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. All right. This is the Western yellow jacket. So this piece began with 2 wasp nests that I found on top of my garage door frame when I was emptying it out for demolition. To make way for my new studio. So I moved out of the Emerson, I think around 2013, and I now have a beautiful studio in my backyard. So because there were only 2, the idea of duality emerged for me, which led to rambling thoughts about yin yang, black and white, the hexagrams and the I Ching, the hexagons in the interior of the wasp nest that has a honeycomb structure to it. And then I moved on to astrology, and finally, because the wasp nest resemble planets, the cosmos. So here you can see these nests. They're sitting in what's called encaustic paint, which is a combination of beeswax and pigment. And you can see some of the cardinal directions that are surrounding the band. So the diamond-shaped ones are north, south, east, west. And then there's the intercardinal directions that are on the folded hexagons. So northwest, southwest, northeast, southeast. Here's a side view of the nests. And here you can see the astrological signs that I stamped in on the top band, and then the numbered months are below that, and then the days of the week are below that. So I inscribed all this into steel and then used metal stamps to stamp in the astrological signs. So this brass piece you can see here is kind of an elongated hexagon. Here's a close-up of the cosmos piece on the top, and I began to research celestial theories, and I was drawn to the more obscure proposal of the planetary universe, in part because it resembles the configuration with the nest below. So this version of the cosmos is by a 17th century Italian astronomer and Catholic priest by the name of Giovanni Battista Riccioli. And his system has the Earth at the center with the moon orbiting around that. And then here's the sun, and we have Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and they're all orbiting the sun. And then that group is all orbiting the Earth. And then we have Jupiter and Saturn that are all orbiting the Earth. And in the outer ring, you can see the holes in there. Those represent the stars that are at the edge of the universe. So when this was all being proposed, this was done without the aid of a telescope. The first telescope was invented shortly afterwards in the Netherlands in 1608. And just to give you an idea of the remarkable amount of knowledge that these early astronomers had. And as an aside, if you've been in the gallery and you've read the description of this piece, I mentioned that one of the nests isn't the original. When I was using a torch to smooth out the wax, I accidentally caught it on fire. So I almost didn't finish this piece, but then I decided to see if I could find one on the internet, and sure enough, I found one on Etsy, and I was able to finish the piece. Okay, so this is a horse chestnut, and a friend gave me a bunch of horse chestnuts that she had gotten up near Great Falls, thinking that I might enjoy using them in an art piece, and she was right. I find these conkers really quite fascinating, the outer spikes contrasting with the inner smooth nuts. They seem to be a popular thing to collect. I've had several people tell me that they collected them as a child. So I knew I wanted to suspend the chestnut, and I remembered a sculpture that I had seen in this gallery many years ago. And it had two large vertical wheels facing each other with rope strung between the wheels, kind of similar to my piece, except flipped horizontal. And you could turn one end and it would twist the ropes and constrict them in the center. And then when you let it go, it would unwind and rewind from the momentum. So I kind of went with a similar style of that. I'm a big mountain biker, and I've always liked the shape and the function of gears. So I decided that the top and the bottom pieces should look like gears. And I needed a way to keep track of where the filament would attach at each point from the bottom to the top. And so I decided to use the alphabet, but I needed one extra letter because there's 3 posts. And so I needed 27, which is divisible by 3. So I added an ampersand. So at the end of the alphabet, it's X, Y, and Z. I started this piece 3 years ago, right at a time when I started losing hearing in one of my ears. And it turns out I have what's called Meniere's disease, which is an inner ear disorder that can cause hearing loss and vertigo, which fortunately I don't have very often. So when that was happening, I was thinking about alternative forms of communication, and I looked into using Braille alongside the type. So the raised dots on the braille in this piece are created by drilling holes and then using a brass rod to create the raised rivet. And then I have a little device that can round off the top. So here's the lowercase on the bottom. And people often ask, how do I cut out this stuff? It's all cut out by hand. And I use a computer quite a bit. And so I will design something on the computer and then I'll print it out. And then I'll just paste that piece of paper right onto the steel before I start drilling holes and cutting it. I also use the computer for this piece. It was helpful to figure out the exact angle for the side supports. So it turns out it's 8 degrees. And then the buttresses that you see, they're actually made out of copper. And they're sort of a butterfly shape that then I fold over and I crimp it, and then I riveted it with brass, sanded it down, and then I put it in what's called liver of sulfur, which is a patina that turns it black. And the patina doesn't work as well on the brass, so you can still see the brass rivets, which was just fine with me. Also, I did build another whole prototype of this beforehand, just so that I could figure out how much of a twist I needed to hold the conker. So on the band at the bottom, I came across this quote by artist Paul Klee, and it says, "One eye feels and the other sees." And that just seemed really appropriate for this piece. So that's what it says in Braille around the band here. And it's the quote is stamped on the other side. And I just want to point out this brass title plate kind of has the ends, it has little gear teeth on the end. Okay. So this is the nice tour with Hound's Tongue. And this piece falls into the broad category of graph theory, which is an area of discrete math that is all about using graphs to solve various math problems or puzzles. And I came across the Knight's Tour while I was researching other graphs, and I really had no clue what it was about. I played chess as a child, but I had no idea that this puzzle was something that was a serious topic of research, or that the history of it was so lengthy and interesting. So the challenge is to find a path that the knight travels, landing on each square only once. So the tour starts here, and a knight can move either down 2 over 1 or over 1 down 2. And so it moves around the board along this pattern, going around, hitting each square 64 times until it gets to the end. And just for some perspective about the history, the first tour that was recorded was in the 1st century AD. So there's a huge number of different open tours, and that means an open tour is one where the start and the finish points are in different squares. So there's an estimated at least 1.6 times 10 to the 15th solutions, or about 1.6 quadrillion. So looking at the Hound's Tongue burrs here, I had a small collection of them, and I knew that I wanted to use a lot of them. So this was a perfect way to do it. And I thought the heads also had a resemblance to a horse head. So the burrs here are attached to stainless steel nails, and the pathway has linen thread that's used for bookbinding. And the start and finish knight pieces, those are cut out of 1/8" steel. And you can see there's a little piece of red paper on this one because it's the end piece, and there's a green piece of paper on the first one for the beginning. So the chessboard is made with leaves of aspen and oak that were dipped in wax, and then I waxed them onto individual squares of hard panel, which is kind of an archival masonite. And then all of that was glued on to a piece of hard panel in the back. And then I made the frame from some wood reglet, which again is spacing material for letterpress printing. And I actually used the bed of my press while I was gluing this up as a clamp, and so kind of similar to locking up type. So many uses for my letterpress. And let's see. Oh, so this also shows a close-up of the letterpress stuff. So this is all handset type. And it turns out there's all sorts of Knights tours. There are open tours, there's closed tours. Closed tours are where you start and end at the same spot. There's smaller tours on 5x5 boards, up to huge boards that are 130 by 130. There are magical tours and semi-magical tours. And a magical tour has the added feature that when you add up the order of moves on each column, each row, and each diagonal, they all have to add up to the same sum. And a semi-magical tour is just where the columns and the rows add up to the same sum. So in 2003, they finally figured out that there is no magic tour on an 8x8 board, just a semi-magic tour. Okay, so if the Knights tour is not enough of a challenge, there's crypto tours for people who like to combine poetry and tours around the board. There's a lot fewer of these than the Knights tours, and the craze for this sort of crested during the late 19th century. So this poem is concealed in the board on the left, and the first word starts here, and then I'm going to show you the path just for the first line. And this is the same tour that's above on the chessboard. Here's a photo of my Vandercook Universal One letterpress in my messy studio. You can see a couple of my indoor bikes in the background. I also have outdoor bikes and bikes in the shed. And here's some of my, you can see some of my type cases in the back with lead type. I also have a lot more type cases that are on the other side. This is an example of what's called a cylinder press. And it would have been used in some place that had a newspaper. And so they would start with individual stories proofing in this kind of press first, before they would then put it in a much larger press when they were producing a newspaper. Okay, this is the last piece I'm going to talk about. This is the Haberdashers Puzzle, and this is an example of what's called a dissection puzzle, where one geometric shape transforms into another using a certain number of pieces. And this one is in the hinged category, and the challenge is to transform an equilateral triangle to a square in only 4 pieces. It was originally solved in 1903 by English author and mathematician Henry Ernest Dewdney, who later published a mathematical puzzle book with this dissection in it in 1919 titled The Canterbury Puzzles and Other Curious Problems. So in Dewdney's puzzle book, he incorporated pilgrims from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And the pilgrims in Chaucer's tale are instructed to beguile the ride by each telling a tale in a storytelling contest. So Dewdney has adapted these pilgrims to illustrate the math puzzles in his book. And I chose to recreate the puzzle about the haberdasher because I found it to be quite humorous, and I was fascinated with the hinged puzzle, even though it's way beyond my ability to solve it. So I used 4 different grasses that I collected to weave a herringbone pattern suggestive of fabric and something you might find in a haberdashery. And I dipped the grass in beeswax first, then I taped them to a heavy piece of paper in order to weave it. Then I waxed that whole thing again to hold it together. And then I cut out the exact shape to fit into the different sections of the puzzle. So each hinged piece is made of 3 layers of steel, with the top layer being the border that allows space to contain the woven grass. So in this story, the haberdasher is induced to come up with a puzzle. And he struggles for a bit, but then he says he will show them, quote, something that will put their brains into a twist like unto a bell rope. When in actuality, he has no idea how to solve the problem he is proposing. He then challenges them, bluffing his way along, asking if any of them are smart enough to solve this problem of cutting the cloth in only 4 pieces to create a square. And some of the smarter ones figure out a solution in 5 pieces, but not in 4. So then they press the haberdasher to reveal the answer, which of course he doesn't know. And I love his response. He says, "By Saint Francis, saith he, any knave can make a riddle, methinks, but it is for them that may to read it aright." So essentially saying that any deceitful fellow can come up with a riddle, but it's up to the others to figure it out. Here's a close-up of some of the letterpress printings. So the black type is all lead type, and then the letter 4 and the other orange type are all wood type from a lovely collection that I have. Here's a close-up of the final square piece, and you can see the silver rivets that I've used to hold it together and the brass rivets that I used as a hinge. And these are all functional pieces. They actually can hinge. Here's a close-up of the grasses that I used and kind of a key. The spiked muley is the only native grass that I use. The other ones are introduced, and you can find them in a lot of places around here. All right, so that's all I have. This is a photo of some of the saws that I use when cutting the metal, and mostly I use the front 2, which are jeweler's saws. So I'm going to hand it back over to Susan.
Hey, Susie. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, again, I'm just going to say that, oh my goodness, again. I tell everybody that comes in to see the show that you're the reason that we have an encaustic studio in my basement, because my husband fell in love with your work, and it's cost us a lot of money now to try and keep up. We're nowhere near that. And just so you know, my husband's been texting me during your talk going, "Oh my God, she's amazing." And I'm like, I know. So thank you. Thanks for sharing your work and for putting it out there. There's a few questions that have come up in the chat box. And I'm just going to remind folks again, if you have any questions for Susie, please drop them in the chat, and I'm going to do my best to get through them. If you have time to come to the Emerson before this show closes, come see this show in person. See it in person. The pictures are amazing. Seeing it up close is just that much more. So the first question that's coming in, and I'm going to apologize, I am not good with names. Connie Lang is asking, says your approach is similar to Antoni Gaudi. Has his architecture influenced you in any way, specifically the Sagrada Familia?
I'm not familiar with him, so I guess I'm going to have to say no, but now I'm curious. I'm going to have to look him up.
We will save that question for you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah, folks I'm having trouble keeping up with questions versus an absolute love affair with you in the chat box. You can you can review that later, maybe with a glass of wine. Kelly MacArthur has asked, I wonder how you decided which of the quadrillion Knights tours to showcase on this board.
So I chose that one because that was the one that the crypto tour used the poem in. So it made an obvious choice. But you know, with so many different ones, and there's some really interesting different designs that people have come up with. And there's ones that kind of travel around the edge first and then go inside, and that have some that have a lot more symmetry, some that don't. But no, this was a pretty simple. It's like, well, this is where the crypto tour is, so this is what the Knights tour is going to be.
Nice. I'm going to pause right there. Allison Reynolds, it looks like you're somehow able to mess with our screen a little bit, and we're getting a few red lines. So I could ask you to please, keep your finger off the cursor for a minute, or I'll have to, unfortunately, boot you from the talk. Lila would like to know, when did you start mixing metals and organics?
Well, right after I took the metalsmithing class and the encaustic class, and just a weekend in caustics was so short, but it really made me realize just how many different things you can do with wax. You can layer it. It's a fabulous material to work with. It's really interesting. I feel like I have just scratched the surface on what you can do with it. So, and then just my interest in plants, and wax is such a great preservative. So that was the other reason for using the wax with the plants.
And I think that wax is a really sexy medium, just like clay. I think wax is really sexy. It just has a ultra tactile, and you can do so much with it.
Yeah, and it has that really nice just luster about it.
Yeah.
And it smells great too.
Yeah, don't smell it too much though, right?
Only if it gets too hot.
That's a little bad for you. It's a little bad for you. We need to teach good behavior here, Susie. Susan, you're asking when the show closes. It closes April 30th. We'll actually deinstall the work the following week. So if you want to come in on Monday morning, you'll be able to get a glimpse of it then as well on May 3rd. But the show closes April 30th. Very soon.
Good to know.
T. Weaver is asking a little bit more about the tools that you use, Susie, to create your work.
Yeah. So I actually brought the saw.
Yes.
I don't know how well you can see it, but so this is one of the saws that I use, and this is where the blade is, and it's probably so tiny that you can't see it.
Put your hand behind the blade, Susie. It'll show it a little. It's still going to disappear. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty tiny. So this is what I use to cut the metal. I have a drill press that I, of course, use a lot to drill holes. I use teeny tiny files. I use a lot of the tools that a jeweler would use. And I do wear magnifying glasses because it works pretty small.
It's tiny.
Yeah, tweezers. Yeah. I do have a metal shear and a bender brake, so that's what I do if I have to bend something. And one of my bender brakes can create rounded curves too, so that's kind of nice.
Nice. Nikki is asking, what was it like to create such precise lettering, mixing the diagrams with labels?
Mixing the diagrams. I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question, except to say that, with letterpress printing, when you set type, you're sort of limited in the sizes that you have to use. And I'm not sure if that's answering the question. I guess I want to throw out that I really like botanical prints. I don't know if that helps with some of the layout that I do, and how I've done some of the graph theory ones that kind of have a major thing and then an explanation of different items, aspects about it, around it. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nikki.
Susie, Abby is asking, what inspired you to mix mathematics and botany?
Well, I've always really liked math, and I think it kind of started with me finding or looking around and seeing the Western Salsabee and seeing this spiral shape and the seed heads, and I was just like, I'm starting to see this in other plants, and why is that? And then, when I started to look into it, just the fact that there's so much math behind this, and the connection with the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is something I learned about in art school, reflecting architecture. So I don't know, it just seemed like a good combination, and I don't know, it just sort of evolved. And I just kept getting interested in more things. So that's kind of where it went.
Nice. Susan McCall is asking if you show your works in other galleries around town. I'm going to answer that for Susie. And the answer is not yet, but Mama Denson is pushing hard. Just keep that in mind. Mama Denson's given her a nice little nudge there because her work is spectacular. Mary Ellen, sorry, is asking, is there an overarching message that you intended or wanted your work to convey?
You know what, I would have to say that I really am thrilled that people are experiencing a sense of wonder. And I love that it seems like people are having a new appreciation for plants, especially important, this being Earth Day. And that really it's all connected and we're all connected. And yeah, and that just that art is really an important endeavor, and creativity is something that we all have. And I'm just glad that I can share it with people now, having been in my studio kind of alone for a while.
I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that you agreed to have an artist talk in this format this evening. I know it's not the same as having us all in the same room and a glass of wine and, you know, little mushy cubes of cheese, but I'm really grateful for this, and I'm grateful that folks can join from across the country. I'm seeing friends of ours and supporters of the Emerson joining from outside of Montana, so I think the scope of this is just brilliant. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your work and your time with us.
Yeah.
And it's just a pleasure. It's an awesome exhibit that I get to take a break and step out of my office every day and ask people if they want to know a little bit more about it. And then most of the time tell them, oh, I don't quite know that answer, but let me tell you a little bit more about Susie. So,
well, I really appreciate the Emerson allowing me to have my show here. It was really what I wanted to do, and I'm thrilled. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for you know, letting us push you a little bit to share your work. I know it's been a while, and I'm tickled. So we're gonna keep the shove going.
Thanks.
All right, with that, Susie, we're gonna let you stop your screen share on your end there.
Okay. All right.
I'm gonna invite Tamara to share a couple more slides with us this evening. There we go. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at the Emerson this evening. And Tamara, I'm going to let you roll at your own speed there. I don't have the clicker like you did. Again, thanks, Susie, for sharing the Botany of Mathre, an exploration of numbers and nature. You can visit her show here at the Emerson through April 30th. You might be able to see it on Monday the 3rd if you come in. We'll still be in the process of deinstalling all of the shows. The virtual tour is available on our website and social media. All of the answers that we made it through tonight we'll share on YouTube, and we'll post the entire artist talk on our YouTube channel. Should be up by next week. It takes a little time to render the video. All of the links can be found at the Emerson site if you don't want to scour through YouTube or our Facebook. I'm gonna let you roll up, Tamara. Coming up next month, Where the Wild Things Are by Asher J. will be in the Weaver Room. Natural Abstraction by Heather Cromwell, another Emerson tenant sharing her work with us. And Torrent will be in the space in the Jessie Wilber by Melissa Dawn. All of the exhibits will be open in May. Thanks, COVID, you stinker. We're still not hosting in-person artist talks or receptions, but we will be sharing things with you in person. And you're always welcome to mask up and come in and experience the exhibits in person. I'd like to thank you. Thank you for supporting the arts. Thank you for supporting the Emerson. Give Big Gallatin Valley is May 6th and 7th. It'll be the 7th year of Give Big. If you have it in your heart and you can think of us on that day, we would greatly appreciate it. You're also welcome to visit the Emerson at www.theemerson.org and become a monthly donor. Again, thanks for joining us tonight. Susie, thanks so much for sharing your work and your magic in that crazy that comes out. It's still meticulous perfection. That's the best way that I could describe your work. It is meticulous perfection. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We hope to see you here soon. Take good care.
Thanks.